German officers mocked the Sherman until they faced it in the hedgerows of Normandy. Section 1. The hedgerows await. June 13th, 1944. Normandy, France, near the village of Tilly-sur-Seulles. The morning air is thick with mist and the sour smell of crushed earth. Dew clings to the hedgerows like sweat on a brow, soaking the wool uniforms of the German infantry crouched in the shadows. Oberleutnant Franz Keller, commander of a Panzer IV platoon from the 2nd Panzer Division, stands half exposed from his turret, binoculars pressed to his eyes. Somewhere beyond the green walls of Bocage, engines rumble, low, uneven, unmistakably American. Keller lowers the binoculars and snorts. Shermans, he mutters, the word edged with contempt. Around him, his crew exchange knowing looks. They have heard the stories since North Africa, since Sicily. Thin armor, high silhouette, gasoline fires, Tommy cookers. Against a Panther or a Tiger, the American M4 Sherman is supposed to be a joke. Keller had laughed at the intelligence briefings back in May. The Panther was a predator, its long 75mm gun lethal at ranges the Sherman could only dream of. The Tiger, with its 88mm cannon and slabs of armor, was a moving fortress. The Sherman, by comparison, was a mass-produced compromise built for speed and ease, not for duels between steel giants. German officers had been trained to think in terms of penetration tables and armor thickness, and by those measures the Sherman did not impress. But Normandy is not a proving ground for clean, long-range tank battles. The first American tank noses in a view through a gap blasted in the hedgerow by artillery. It is olive drab, mud-caked, its white star half obscured. Infantry follow close behind, rifles and bars at the ready, sticking to the tank's flanks as if it were a moving wall. Keller watches, puzzled. The Sherman does not advance boldly into open ground. It inches forward, pauses, then fires its 75mm gun point-blank into the hedge ahead, shredding earth, roots, and anything hiding within. The crack of the gun is followed by the metallic chatter of coaxial machine guns. Leaves explode outward. Dirt rains down. Somewhere in the hedge, a German machine gun position goes silent. Strange tactics, Keller says to his gunner, Feldwebel Otto Brandt. They move like infantry. Brandt shrugs. Maybe they're afraid. But Keller feels something else gnawing at him. This is not the Sherman of the training films, racing across open desert. This Sherman is cautious, methodical, working hand in glove with the men on foot. When Keller orders his Panzer IV forward to engage, the tank lurches, gears grinding. The narrow Norman lanes funnel his movement, forcing him into a predictable approach. The Panther platoon assigned to support him is delayed, one tank already sidelined by a broken final drive. The Americans, by contrast, keep coming. Another Sherman appears, then another. Keller counts 4, then 6. They are not spaced like German doctrine would suggest. They are close, overlapping fields of fire, covering each other as they move. When Keller's gunner fires, the first round slams into a Sherman's front glacis and ricochets with a shriek of metal. The American tank halts, but does not burn. Instead, its turret slews, and within seconds smoke rounds bloom around Keller's Panzer IV, choking the view. The battlefield dissolves into confusion. American artillery begins to fall, timed almost perfectly with the tank advance. Explosions hammer the hedgerows, blasting gaps wide enough for tanks to push through. German infantry, isolated in pockets, are forced to choose between surrender and annihilation. Inside his turret, Keller feels the war he thought he understood slipping away. This is not a contest of individual machines. It is something broader, heavier, relentless. For every Sherman that halts or pulls back, another seems to take its place. He realizes, with a flicker of unease, that the Americans are not trying to win a duel. They're trying to move forward, no matter the cost, and they have the numbers and the coordination to do it. By midday, Keller's platoon is reduced to 2 operational tanks. A direct hit from Sherman's gun has knocked out his wingman, but within minutes American engineers are already dragging their damaged vehicles back, smoke still rising, replaced by fresh tanks rolling in from the rear. Keller watches this churn of men and machines with disbelief. German recovery crews would take hours, sometimes days, to attempt the same under fire. As his remaining Panzer IV reverses into cover, Keller hears the clatter of American tank engines growing closer, steady and unhurried. For the first time since arriving in Normandy, he does not feel superior. He feels hunted, and somewhere in the hedgerows, the mocking nickname Tommy Cooker begins to lose its meaning. Section 2. Preconception Shattered. June 14, 1944. Outskirts of Villers-Bocage. Night has fallen over Normandy, but sleep does not come easily. In a candlelit farmhouse commandeered as a battalion command post, Oberleutnant Franz Keller sits hunched over a folding table, helmet at his feet, fingers stained with grease and soot. The walls tremble faintly with distant artillery. Outside, the smell of damp hay mixes with burned fuel, a reminder of the day's losses. Across from him, Hauptmann Ernst Vogel of the Panzer Lehr Division listens in silence as Keller recounts the engagement. Vogel is a veteran of France in 1940 and the Eastern Front, a man who has fought T-34s at Kursk and still carries a fragment of shrapnel near his spine. He has little patience for excuses. You're saying the Shermans advanced under fire, halted, withdrew, and were replaced within minutes? Vogel asks, his voice flat. Yes, Herr Hauptmann, Keller replies, and always with infantry. They didn't rush us. They pressed, paused, then pressed again. Vogel exhales slowly. He has seen American tanks before, in Italy, with a terrain also favored defense. But Normandy is different. The bocage turns every field into a fortress, every lane into a kill zone. German doctrine, honed on the plains of Russia, assumes space, room to maneuver, to engage at range. Here, range is measured in meters, not kilometers. At dawn, the lesson becomes harsher. Villers-Bocage awakens to the sound of engines and the crack of small arms fire. German grenadiers dig in along sunken roads, their Panzerfaust ready. They expect the Americans to probe cautiously after the previous day's resistance. Instead, Sherman tanks appear almost immediately, pushing through gaps bulldozed into the hedgerows by modified tanks fitted with crude steel prongs. Rhino blades, the infantry call them. The Germans had dismissed reports of these contraptions as field improvisations, hardly worth noting. Now Keller watches one in action as it rams the earthen bank of a hedgerow, tearing it open in seconds. A Sherman bursts through, gun already trained, infantry spilling after it. A Panzerfaust streaks from cover and slams into the Sherman side. The explosion rocks the tank, and Keller feels a familiar surge of satisfaction, until the hatch pops open and an American crewman emerges, alive, waving frantically. Within moments, another Sherman rolls forward, covering the damaged tank with suppressive fire. Smoke grenades hiss, forming a curtain. Engineers rush in, towing the crippled vehicle back. They don't leave their wounded machines, Keller murmurs. The Americans keep advancing, not in a reckless charge but in a grinding rhythm. Tank, infantry, artillery. Each element supports the others, overlapping, compensating. When German anti-tank guns open fire, American forward observers call in artillery with astonishing speed. The reply is swift and brutal, shells crashing down with precision Keller has rarely seen. By midday, Villers-Bocage is contested ground. German Panthers finally arrive, their long guns barking, knocking out two Shermans in quick succession. Flames lick skyward, black smoke curling above the hedgerows. For a moment, it feels like the balance is restored. Then the Americans adapt. Shermans begin firing smoke, blinding the Panthers. Infantry slip through the hedges, flanking positions, forcing the German tank crews to button up. A Sherman with a 76mm gun, newer, longer-barreled, engages from close range, punching a round into a Panther side at barely 100 meters. The Panther burns. Keller's radio crackles with frantic reports. Ammunition is running low. Fuel is scarce. A recovery vehicle sent to tow a damaged Panzer has been destroyed by fighter bombers that swooped in without warning. We underestimated them, he admits quietly. Not the tank itself, but how they use it. No one contradicts him. Reports filtering up the chain of command echo the same theme. Shermans are not winning by superior armor or gunpowder. They're winning by appearing everywhere, by being repaired quickly, by returning to the fight again and again. German units, by contrast, bleed irreplaceable machines and veteran crews with each engagement. Keller writes his after-action report late into the night. He chooses his words carefully, aware that candor can be dangerous. Still, he notes the Americans' coordination, their speed of recovery, their willingness to absorb losses to maintain momentum. As he finishes, he pauses, pen hovering. For the first time, he does not write inferior enemy tank. He writes simply enemy armor. Section 3, the Bocage Crucible. June 20th, 1944. South of Caumont-Televat. Rain turns the Norman soil into a sucking mire, clinging to boots and tracks alike. The hedgerows loom like walls of green stone, 8 feet high in places, their roots interwoven with centuries of compacted earth. 4 German defenders, the Bocage had initially seemed a gift from fate. For the Americans, it was a nightmare they were learning to master, one field at a time. Oberleutnant Franz Keller now commands what remains of his platoon, a single Panzer IV and a handful of grenadiers attached for local security. The rest are gone, knocked out, broken down, or abandoned for lack of fuel. Each morning begins with the same ritual, checking the engine for signs of strain, counting shells, rationing radio use to conserve batteries. Across the fields, the Americans prepare again. The advance begins with artillery, a rolling thunder that shakes loose clods of dirt from the hedgerows. Keller braces inside his turret as shock waves hammer the tank, the metallic smell of cordite seeping in through the seams. When the barrage lifts, he expects a pause, a chance to reposition. There is none. Shermans push forward almost immediately, their engines roaring with a confidence Keller finds unsettling. They do not drive blindly. Each tank halts at the hedgerow, fires high-explosive rounds to strip away foliage, then punches through using Rhino blades welded to their hulls. Infantry squads follow so closely that Keller can see individual faces, mud-streaked, eyes alert, moving with purpose. German anti-tank guns open fire from concealed positions. One Sherman erupts in flame, its turret hatch blown open by the blast. Keller feels a grim satisfaction, but it fades quickly. Another Sherman takes its place within minutes, firing into the hedgerow that concealed the gun. The gun crew is annihilated. The fight becomes intimate, brutal. Engagements are measured in seconds and meters. A Sherman round a corner unexpectedly, and Keller's gunner fires instinctively, the shell slamming into the American tank's mantlet. The impact jars Keller's teeth. The Sherman recoils, smoke pouring from its engine deck, but again, it does not burn. Its crew bails out under cover of suppressive fire, and within moments American medics are dragging them away. Keller realizes that survival, not just victory, is baked into American tactics. Crews are trained to escape, to live, to fight again. German crews, trapped in burning steel coffins, rarely get that chance. By afternoon, the Americans bring up tank destroyers and self-propelled artillery. The hedgerows echo with overlapping fire, a relentless pressure that gives Keller no time to maneuver. Every attempt to shift position risks air attack. Jabos, fighter bombers, circle constantly, diving on any movement with rockets and machine gun fire. The Panzer IV's engine coughs. Keller knows the sound too well. Overheating. A crack hose, perhaps, or worse. He orders a withdrawal into a sunken lane, heart pounding as the tank limps backward. The lane offers concealment, but also confinement. If the engine fails here, the tank will be lost. As they wait, Keller listens to the radio chatter. German units across the sector report similar conditions. Panthers immobilized by mechanical failures. Tigers abandoned for lack of fuel. Replacement parts stuck far behind the lines, delayed by Allied air power. Each loss is permanent. Then comes the American infantry. They appear at the edge of the lane, cautious, methodical. A Sherman noses forward, gun trained directly down the road. Keller's gunner whispers a range estimate. Keller hesitates. If he fires, he reveals his position. If he waits, he risks being flanked. The decision is made for him. An American bazooka team slips through the hedgerow to the flank. Keller hears the shout, the warning, then the impact. The shaped charge slams into the Panzer IV side armor, punching through. Flames lick into the fighting compartment. Out! Out! Keller shouts. They scramble for the hatches as smoke fills the turret. Keller tumbles into the lane, rolling into the mud as machine gun fire snaps overhead. He crawls into a ditch, heart hammering, lungs burning. From his hiding place, Keller watches his tank burn. It is a familiar sight now, too familiar. But what strikes him most is what happens next. The Americans do not linger. Once the tank is confirmed destroyed, they move on, pressing forward, momentum unbroken. By nightfall, Keller and a handful of survivors make their way back on foot. They pass abandoned German vehicles, silent and dark, monuments to a doctrine unsuited for this war. At a makeshift command post, Keller overhears an intelligence officer reading excerpts from intercepted American reports. Casualties are acknowledged, losses noted, but the advance continues regardless. Later, Keller sits alone, staring at the flickering flame of a candle. He thinks of the pre-war lectures, the emphasis on armor thickness and gun caliber. None of it seems sufficient here. In Normandy, he realizes war is not decided by the best tank, but by the army that can keep fighting after losing one. Section 4. Doctrine Under Fire. June 25, 1944. Panzer Group West Headquarters, near Locane. The bunker reeks of damp concrete, cigarette smoke, and stale coffee. Maps cover the walls, their neat lines already outdated by the hour. Red and blue pins mark positions that no longer exist. In the dim light, General Leo Gehr von Schweppenberg stands rigid, hands clasped behind his back, listening as staff officers deliver reports from the front. The tone has changed. Gone is the confident language of technical superiority. Gone are the dismissive references to American armor as inferior machines. What replaces them is something far more troubling: frustration, disbelief, and a growing sense of inevitability. A colonel clears his throat. Repeated engagements indicate that American armored units maintain pressure despite losses. Damaged Shermans are often recovered within hours and returned to service. Enemy infantry operates in unusually close coordination with tanks. Gehr says nothing. He has already read similar reports from Panzerlehr, from the 2nd Panzer Division, from SS units fighting near Cannes. The pattern is unmistakable. German tanks still win many one-on-one encounters, but those encounters no longer decide the battle. In Normandy, the enemy does not seek duels. He seeks progress. At the tactical level, officers like Franz Keller feel the shift in their bones. Now serving as an infantry liaison after the loss of his tank, Keller moves with a grenadier company tasked with holding a narrow sector near the Vire River. They dig foxholes into the hedgerow banks, their rifles and machine guns trained on likely avenues of approach. When the Americans come, they come as expected, and yet never quite as anticipated. Artillery first, then tanks, then infantry, overlapping, persistent. Keller watches as Shermans deliberately draw fire, exposing German positions so that artillery and mortars can annihilate them. The tank crews know they're vulnerable, but they also know they're expendable in a way German tanks are not. Keller hears a grenadier mutter bitterly. They trade steel for ground. The phrase sticks with him. German doctrine, shaped by the early blitzkrieg victories, prizes decisive action and maneuver. Tanks are spearheads, meant to break through and exploit. In Normandy, there is no open space to exploit. Every field is contested. Every advance costs blood and metal. The Americans, with their vast industrial base, can afford that exchange. By contrast, German losses accumulate like unpaid debts. A Panther immobilized by a broken gearbox becomes a bunker or a liability. Fuel shortages force units to abandon otherwise intact vehicles. Veteran crews are lost, replaced by hastily trained. The Americans exploit this mercilessly. In one engagement, Keller witnesses a Sherman deliberately expose its flank, drawing fire from a concealed anti-tank gun. As soon as the gun fires, American artillery obliterates the position. The Sherman backs away, damaged but mobile, its job done. Another tank rolls forward to continue the advance. That night, Keller listens to a captured American radio broadcast intercepted by German signals troops. The announcer speaks of progress measured not in kilometers, but in fields cleared, villages taken, junctions secured. There is no triumphalism, only determination. Back at headquarters, Gare drafts a message to OKW. He chooses his words with care, aware of the political dangers of candor. Still, the message is blunt by German standards. The enemy's armored forces, he writes, derive effectiveness less from technical superiority than from numerical strength, logistical support, and combined arms doctrine. Current conditions negate many advantages of our heavier tanks. Is an admission few would have dared to make a year earlier. On the front lines, Keller feels the consequences immediately. Orders emphasize holding ground at all costs. Counterattacks are planned, then canceled for lack of fuel or air cover. Each delay benefits the Americans, who continue to bring up fresh units, fresh tanks, fresh supplies. One evening, Keller shares a cigarette with a wounded Panzer officer being evacuated to the rear. The man laughs softly, without humor. I used to mock the Sherman, he says. Now I fear it, not because it is strong, but because there is always another one. As the days pass, the hedgerows become less a shield and more trap. The Americans learn every contour, every weakness. Rhino tanks tear through earth that once seemed impassable. Engineers widen lanes, creating new routes where none existed before. Keller senses a turning point approaching. The pressure is building, coiling like a spring. Whatever the Americans are preparing, it will not be another cautious advance. It will be a break. Section 5, Operation Cobra. July 25, 1944. Near St. Lo, the sky over Normandy darkens not with clouds, but with aircraft. At dawn, Franz Keller lies pressed into a shallow slit trench carved into the hedgerow bank, his helmet pulled low, chin buried in the mud. The air vibrates with a distant hum that grows steadily louder, deeper, until it feels less like sound and more like pressure on the bones. He has heard artillery barges before, thousands of them, but this is different. This is something vast, mechanical, inescapable. Then the first bombs fall. The earth convulses as if struck by a giant's hammer. The hedgerow above Keller disintegrates, roots and soil hurled skyward. The concussion slams the breath from his lungs. Around him, men scream or go silent. The bombing does not come in waves. It comes in an unbroken flood. Heavy bombers, B-17s and B-24s, pound the German front lines with mathematical brutality, flattening everything in a wide corridor west of St. Lo. This is Operation Cobra. For the German defenders, there is no line, no cohesion, only survival. Communication wires are severed. Radios crackle uselessly or go dead. Units are erased in minutes. When the bombing finally lifts, the battlefield is unrecognizable. Hedgerows leveled, roads cratered, vehicles overturned like toys. Keller staggers to his feet, ears ringing, vision blurred. He can barely orient himself. Officers shout, trying to gather survivors, but the landmarks they once used are gone. The bocage that had favored defense has been smashed flat. Then the Shermans come. They advance not cautiously now, but with urgency, engines roaring as columns surge through the shattered German positions. Infantry follows in trucks and half-tracks, dismounting to clear pockets of resistance. Artillery rolls forward behind them, setting up almost as quickly as the tanks pass. Keller watches in disbelief as dozens, then hundreds, of American tanks pour through the breach. There is no attempt at finesse. This is exploitation, pure and simple. The Shermans move fast, bypassing resistance, leaving isolated German units to be dealt with later. A lone German Panther opens fire from a concealed position, knocking out a Sherman at close range. For a moment, Keller feels the old spark of hope. But the Panther is immediately bracketed by artillery. Smoke blooms, then fire. The Panther is silenced. The lesson is unmistakable. In this new phase of the battle, individual heroics mean nothing. As Cobra unfolds, German command struggles to respond. Counterattack orders are issued, revised, canceled. Fuel trucks are destroyed by Allied aircraft before they reach the front. Units that might have sealed the breach are scattered, their tanks damaged, or simply out of gas. Keller is swept along with a stream of retreating soldiers, moving south and east, always under threat from the air. He sees Shermans racing along roads that German tanks would have avoided for fear of ambush. Now the Americans risk speed over caution, and they are rewarded. The Sherman strengths, once dismissed, now reveal themselves fully. It is fast enough, reliable enough, easy enough to maintain. Crews drive for hours without breakdowns, refuel quickly, press on. When a tank is hit, recovery vehicles haul it away, or it is simply replaced by another rolling forward from the rear. German officers had once scoffed at the idea that quantity could defeat quality. In the chaos of Cobra, Keller watches that theory collapse in real time. By July 27th, the German front west of St. Lo has ceased to exist. The Americans are pouring through into open country, exactly the kind of terrain German armor doctrine prized, but now it belongs to the enemy. Shermans fan out across fields and roads, seizing crossroads, cutting supply lines, encircling units before they even realize they are in danger. Keller spends a night hiding in an orchard as American tanks rumble past, their silhouettes stark against the moonlit sky. He listens to their engines, steady and confident, and thinks back to the early days of the campaign, of laughter at intelligence briefings, of smug comparisons between armor thickness and gun caliber. Those calculations seem grotesquely irrelevant now. When Keller finally reaches a regimental headquarters, he learns the scale of the disaster. Divisions shattered, commanders killed or captured. The American breakout is not a localized success. It is a strategic rupture. In the days that follow, German situation reports grow increasingly stark. One phrase appears again and again in different forms from different units. The enemy advances despite losses. For Keller, the realization is complete. The Sherman did not need to be the best tank on the battlefield. It needed only to be good enough, backed by an army that could replace it, repair it, and coordinate it with overwhelming force. And now, as the war in the West tilts decisively against Germany, that truth is rolling eastward on tracks of olive-drab steel. Section 6. The Collapse of Illusions. August 1st, 1944. Near Avranches. The air smells of dust and hot oil, a dry heat replacing the damp chill of the bocage. Franz Keller stands on a low rise overlooking a road choked with German traffic, trucks, horse-drawn wagons, staff cars, and tanks inching forward in hopeless congestion. Operation Cobra has burst the front wide open, and now the German army in Normandy is trying, desperately, to realign itself before it is encircled. The attempt feels futile. American fighter bombers swoop overhead in relentless waves. Their engines howl like hunting birds. Each dive sends men scrambling for ditches as rockets slam into the road, erupting in fire and splintered steel. A Panther ahead of Keller shudders, smoke pouring from its engine deck after a near miss. The crew abandons it without orders, knowing what comes next. Shermans appear at the edges of the chaos, advancing along parallel routes, cutting in behind German columns. They do not pause to duel. They fire into the traffic, disable vehicles, block escape routes, then move on. Infantry follows, mopping up. Keller has seen German tanks perform similar maneuvers in 1940. The difference now is brutal. The Germans are on the receiving end, and they lack the means to respond. At a temporary command post near Avranches, officers gather around a map that changes by the hour. The talk is no longer about holding ground, but about saving what can be saved. Keller listens as a major from an SS Panzer division speaks openly, something unthinkable weeks earlier. Our tanks are better in theory, the major says. In practice, they're too few, too fragile, and reports indicate that entire German units are being bypassed and cut off, their heavy tanks unable to keep pace or maneuver around destroyed bridges and cratered roads. Shermans, lighter and more forgiving, cross improvised bridges, detour through fields, and keep moving. Keller marches with a mixed group of stragglers, tankers, infantry, artillerymen, none of them belonging to the same unit anymore. Discipline erodes under constant air attack. Orders arrive late or not at all. Fuel becomes a rumor. One afternoon, they stumble upon the remains of a German repair depot. Burned-out Panthers sit in rows, their armor intact but their engines gutted by bombs. Keller runs a hand along the scorched steel, feeling the absurdity of it. Machines designed to dominate the battlefield have been destroyed without ever firing a shot. Nearby, an American Sherman lies disabled in a ditch, track thrown. Its crew is already gone. Keller notes the contrast. One Sherman lost, scarcely noticed. One Panther lost, a catastrophe. The German High Command issues directives urging renewed counterattacks, invoking honor and duty. On the ground, those words ring hollow. Keller sees young officers nod grimly, knowing the orders cannot be carried out. Tanks that remain operational are husbanded like jewels, committed only when absolutely necessary, and often too late. By mid-August, the situation crystallizes around Falaise. The Allied pincers close, and the roads become slaughterhouses. Keller survives by luck and instinct, moving at night, hiding by day. He watches as Shermans and Canadian tanks choke the exits, their guns firing methodically into the mass of trapped German forces. In the chaos, Keller encounters an old comrade from his Panzer 4 days. The man's uniform is torn, his face hollow. "We mock them," the man says, voice hoarse. "All that talk about armor thickness. We forgot the rest of the war. The rest of the war. Logistics, air power, doctrine, the ability to absorb losses and keep advancing." As Keller finally slips eastward across the Seine with a handful of survivors, he looks back at Normandy, not as a place of hedgerows and fields, but as the grave of an illusion. The illusion that superior machines could compensate for inferior circumstances. The illusion that the Sherman was an enemy to be laughed at. The Americans have proven otherwise, not by building the perfect tank, but by building the perfect system. And in that system, the Sherman has found its true strength. Section 7. After the breakout. August 20th, 1944. Eastern bank of the Seine. The river flows wide and slow, reflecting a gray sky heavy with smoke and ash. Makeshift bridges, some German, some abandoned Allied pontoons. The crossings, many shattered by air attack. Franz Keller crosses at dawn with a small group of survivors, boots slipping on wet planks, every step shadowed by the fear of strafing fighters. When he reaches the far bank, he does not feel relief, only exhaustion. Behind him lies Normandy. Ahead, retreat. The remnants of German armored units attempt to reorganize as they fall back toward the German border. On paper, divisions still exist. In reality, they're skeletal formations, hollowed out by weeks of relentless pressure. Tanks are counted one by one. Crews are mixed and remixed, strangers fighting beside strangers. Keller is reassigned again, this time as an operations officer for a provisional camp group built around whatever armor can still move. They march through towns already stripped bare, civilians watching silently from doorways. The roads are cratered, bridges blown, rail lines twisted wreckage. Everywhere, the signs of Allied air supremacy are unmistakable. Even stationary vehicles are camouflaged obsessively. Branches lashed to hulls, movement restricted to night. At night, Keller listens to the distant rumble of engines. American engines, steady and unbroken. Reports filter in from the front. American armored spearheads advancing deep into France, racing toward Paris, then beyond. Sherman's leading columns of half-tracks and trucks, supported by artillery that seems to materialize wherever needed. The German response is reactive, always late. In one skirmish near a crossroads outside Chartres, Keller observes a familiar pattern. A German Panther ambushes a Sherman from concealment, knocking it out with a single shot. The Panther crew cheers briefly, then the Americans respond. Smoke blankets the area. Infantry infiltrates. Artillery pounds the treeline. Within minutes, the Panther is immobilized, its crew forced to abandon it. The crossroads falls anyway. Keller begins to notice something else, something subtle but profound. American crews rotate. Fresh faces appear. Their tanks bear scars, patched armor, welded repairs, but they keep moving. German crews, by contrast, grow fewer, older, more strained. The war has become a test, not of bravery, but of endurance. Captured American documents, translated by intelligence officers, confirm what Keller already knows. Sherman losses are expected, planned for, accounted for. Replacement tanks arrive in steady streams from ports and depots. Crews receive training not only in gunnery, but in cooperation with infantry, engineers, and air support. The tank is not an independent weapon. It is part of a network. One evening, Keller sits with a fellow officer, Major Heinrich Wolf, a former instructor at a Panzer school. "We taught our cadets to fight tanks," Wolf says quietly. "They taught their soldiers to fight wars." The distinction lingers in the air between them. As September approaches, the German army in the West faces a new reality. The fear of the Sherman is no longer tied to its gun or its armor, but to its presence, ubiquitous, persistent, backed by an industrial machine that seems inexhaustible. Reports from units still in contact describe engagements where Shermans are used as mobile artillery, infantry support, reconnaissance platforms, whatever the situation demands. The tank adapts. The Germans struggle too. Keller writes another report, longer this time, more reflective. He describes not a single battle, but a pattern. How American armored units accept losses to maintain tempo. How rapid repair and replacement nullify tactical successes. How combined arms coordination overwhelms isolated resistance. He does not mention mockery. He does not mention pride. He writes of lessons learned, too late. When the report is forwarded, Keller doubts it will change anything. The war has moved beyond lessons. It has become a race against time, and Germany is losing. As autumn approaches and the fighting shifts toward the German frontier, Keller carries with him the memory of Normandy's Hedgerows, the place where theory died and reality asserted itself with brutal clarity. The Sherman, once dismissed as inferior, has proven something far more dangerous than superiority. It has proven sufficiency. Section 8. Reckoning in the Reports. September 10th, 1944. Near the German frontier, west of Aachen. Autumn creeps into the landscape, the leaves beginning to yellow along the roads. Franz Keller rides in the back of a staff car, the engine laboring as it climbs a gentle rise toward a regimental headquarters hastily established in a requisition schoolhouse. The walls are scarred by shrapnel, the windows boarded up. Inside, officers cluster around tables stacked with situation maps and paper, so much paper. This is where the war is now fought as much as on the battlefield. Keller is summoned not to command troops, but to explain them. He sits across from a lieutenant colonel from Army Group B, a man whose uniform is immaculate despite the chaos, his expression unreadable. "You were in Normandy from June through August," the colonel says. "Armored operations?" "Yes, Herr Oberleutnant. We are compiling a consolidated assessment." "Speak freely." It is an invitation Keller has not received before. He begins cautiously, recounting engagements, losses, terrain. But as he speaks, the words gather momentum. He describes the Hedgerows, the Rhino tanks, the speed of American recovery units. He explains how Sherman losses that would have shattered a German battalion barely slowed an American company. He emphasizes coordination, how infantry, armor, artillery, and air support functioned as a single organism. The colonel listens occasionally making notes. And the Sherman itself? He asks finally. Keller hesitates, then answers honestly. Adequate. Not exceptional in any one category, but reliable, easy to repair, forgiving to cruise, and always present. The colonel nods. That matches other. In one document circulated among senior staff, an anonymous officer writes, "Enemy armor effectiveness is a product of system integration rather than individual vehicle performance." It is a sentence that would have been unthinkable in 1941. Keller is assigned to help draft a training memorandum for replacement units. The irony is not lost on him. The lessons of Normandy are to be passed on, even as the material conditions that might allow their application no longer exist. Fuel shortages worsen. Air attacks intensify. Factories are bombed. Replacement tanks arrive late, if at all. On the front lines near Aachen, Keller witnesses the new phase of the war. Shermans support infantry assaults against fortified villages and concrete bunkers. They fire high-explosive rounds into windows and embrasures. Withdraw. Advance again. Flamethrower variants appear. Tank destroyers lurk in Overwatch. The pattern is familiar now. Methodical, relentless. German resistance is fierce but fragmented. Individual tanks still achieve kills, still demonstrate technical prowess. But each success is isolated, quickly smothered by the weight of Allied response. One evening, Keller observes an American maintenance park from a concealed position during a lull in fighting. Rows of Shermans sit under camouflage nets, crews working by lantern light. Engines are swapped, tracks repaired, ammunition replenished. The efficiency is astonishing. There is no drama, no urgency, just routine. That routine, Keller realizes, is the true weapon. He remembers the early days of the invasion, the jokes shared among German officers, the smug certainty that American armor would shatter against German steel. Those jokes are gone now, replaced by a sober respect that borders on dread. The Sherman has become a constant presence in the German imagination, not as a marvel, but as an inevitability. As Keller returns to headquarters, the sound of distant engines follows him through the night. He no longer needs to see the tanks to know they are there. The war has taught him that visibility is irrelevant. What matters is that they will keep coming. Section 9. The Meaning of Normandy. October 2nd, 1944. Near the edge of the Hurtgen Forest. The forest rises dark and dense, a jagged wall of pine and oaks swallowing sound and light alike. Rain seeps steadily through the canopy, turning the narrow tracks into mud-choked trenches. Franz Keller walks with his Stab group along a logging road, boots sinking with each step, the air heavy with rot and cordite. Normandy feels far away now, but its lessons follow him into the trees. Here, the Americans advance again. Shermans appear between the trunks like moving shadows, their engines muffled by damp earth. They are not charging. They creep, halt, fire, and move again, always with infantry close behind. The forest negates long-range fire, just as the bocage once did. The terrain is different, but the pattern is the same. Keller watches a Sherman take a hit from a concealed anti-tank gun. The impact throws sparks, the tank shudders, then reverses smoothly into cover. Smoke billows, obscuring the German position. Moments later, American artillery crashes down on the gun's location, splintering trees like matchsticks. The Sherman does not return. Another takes its place. For Keller, the moment crystallizes everything he has learned since June. Normandy was not an anomaly. It was a demonstration. The Hedgerows did not create American effectiveness. They revealed it. In a temporary command dugout, Keller listens as officers debate the failures of the past months. Some blame terrain. Others blame air power. A few still cling to the belief that a better tank, a heavier gun, a thicker armor plate might have changed the outcome. Keller says nothing at first. Then, quietly, he speaks. In Normandy, we destroyed many Shermans, he says. It did not matter. The room falls silent. He explains what he saw, not as accusation, but as observation. How American armored units accepted losses to maintain tempo. how their logistics erased tactical success, how infantry trusted the tanks and tanks trusted the infantry, how recovery and repair were not afterthoughts, but integral to the plan. We fought tanks, Keller says. They fought systems. No one challenges him. Outside, the forest echoes with distant gunfire. The Americans advance another few hundred meters. A small gain, costly and slow, but inevitable. The same inevitability that rolled through the Normandy Hedgerows now presses into Germany itself. Keller reflects on the mockery that once defined German attitudes toward the Sherman. The jokes had been easy because they focused on what could be measured: millimeters of armor, velocity of shells, penetration at range. Normandy exposed the poverty of that thinking. The Sherman was not designed to win duels. It was designed to be there, on time, in numbers, working with everything else the army could bring to bear. In that role, it proved devastating. As winter approaches, Keller senses the end drawing nearer. Not suddenly, not dramatically, but with the same steady pressure he has come to associate with American armor. The war is being decided not by brilliance, but by persistence. One evening, Keller stands at the forest edge as darkness settles. In the distance, he hears engines again, unhurried, reliable, familiar. He no longer feels anger or contempt, only clarity. Normandy taught him that wars are not won by perfect machines, but by adequate ones used perfectly again and again until resistance collapses under the weight of continuity. The Sherman, once mocked, had delivered that lesson in mud, fire, and steel. Section 10. What the officers learned too late. November 18, 1944. Near Düren, Western Germany. Frost coats the ground in a thin, brittle skin that crunches underfoot. Franz Keller pulls his greatcoat tighter as he walks along a shattered road lined with the carcasses of trees and burned-out vehicles. The front has slowed here, grinding forward through forest and ruined villages, but the pressure never lifts. It only changes shape. In a partially collapsed factory serving as a divisional headquarters, Keller joins a small group of senior officers summoned for a briefing. The atmosphere is subdued, stripped of pretense. Maps show American advances inching forward, arrows overlapping like scars. The talk is not about counteroffensives, but about containment, delay, and preservation. One general, his voice tired but steady, addresses the room. We must be honest with ourselves. The enemy's armored forces have not defeated us through superior tanks alone. They have defeated us through consistency. Consistency. The word echoes. The general continues, citing examples from Normandy, from the breakout, from the pursuit across France. He references internal reports. Keller recognizes phrases he himself once wrote. The conclusion is blunt. German armored doctrine, built around decisive battles and superior individual vehicles, has been eroded by an enemy that refuses to be decisive in the traditional sense. They do not seek the perfect engagement, the general says. They accept the imperfect one and repeat it until we cannot respond. Keller remembers the early days of the campaign, when German officers scoffed at the Sherman's thin armor and modest gun. He remembers how those same officers later begged for air cover, fuel, spare parts, anything that might allow them to fight the war they had trained for, rather than the one they were given. After the briefing, Keller speaks with an old instructor from his Panzer school days, now a colonel. The man stares at a map without really seeing it. We taught them how to kill tanks, the colonel says quietly. But killing tanks was never the problem. Outside, American artillery begins another preparation. The shells fall with metronomic regularity, measured and disciplined. When the barrage lifts, Shermans move forward, infantry close behind, engineers ready to clear obstacles. The pattern repeats, as it has since Normandy. Keller watches from a forward observation point as a Sherman is hit and disabled. Smoke pours from its engine compartment. Within minutes, another tank rolls up, takes its place, and continues the advance. The disabled Sherman is marked, noted, and left for recovery once the line moves forward. There is no drama in it, no triumph, just procedure. German resistance stiffens in places, flares brightly, then fades. Each engagement cost the Americans tanks and men, but never momentum. Keller understands now that momentum is the true currency of modern war. Lose it, and no amount of technical excellence can buy it back. That night, Keller writes in a private notebook he has kept since Normandy, never intended for official eyes. He writes not of tactics, gun caliber, speed. We mocked what did not excel. We failed to see what endured. He closes the notebook as the distant rumble of engines drifts through the cold air. The sound is familiar now, almost expected. It is the sound of a system functioning as intended. The Sherman does not need to be feared for what it is. It is feared for what it represents. Section 11. The Long Shadow of Normandy. December 12, 1944. Eifel region, Western Germany. Snow falls in slow, deliberate flakes, muffling the battlefield into an eerie quiet. The trees stand bare and skeletal, their branches etched against a pale winter sky. Franz Keller trudges along a frozen track with a up detachment, breath fogging in the air, boots slipping on packed ice. The war has entered another season, but it feels less like a change and more like an extension of what began months ago in Normandy. The Americans are quieter now, more deliberate, but no less relentless. Shermans sit hull down behind ridgelines, engines idling steadily despite the cold. Crews move with practiced efficiency, gloved hands working tools, checking tracks, clearing ice from suspension arms. Keller watches from a concealed position through binoculars, struck again by the ordinariness of it all. There is no sense of strain, no sign that the machine, or the system behind it, is nearing exhaustion. German units nearby prepare for a counterstroke, whispered about with cautious hope. There is talk of reserves, of surprise, of weather grounding Allied aircraft. For a moment, Keller allows himself to believe that conditions might finally favor the defender. But even here, even now, Normandy casts its shadow. The counterattack, when it comes, achieves local surprise. German armor surges forward through forest roads, engines roaring, guns firing at muzzle flash range. A Sherman is knocked out, then another. For a brief span of minutes, the old doctrine seems to work. The shock, the concentration, the sudden violence. Then the American response begins. Artillery answers first, methodical and precise. Smoke blinds German gunners. Infantry swarms through the woods, cutting off flanks. Shermans withdraw, reposition, reappear from unexpected angles. Losses are taken, absorbed and replaced. What was a breakthrough becomes a bulge, then a pocket, then a withdrawal. Keller watches the pattern unfold with grim familiarity. Weather may ground aircraft for hours at a time, but it cannot ground logistics. Fuel still flows. Ammunition still arrives. Replacement tanks still appear. After the fighting subsides, Keller encounters a young German tank commander, barely 20 years old, his eyes hollow with fatigue. They told us the Sherman was weak, the young officer says. They told us it would burn. Keller has no answer that will help. He places a hand on the officer's shoulder and moves on. In the days that follow, Keller is tasked with compiling a historical summary of armored engagements since June, an internal document meant to capture lessons learned. He works by candlelight, writing in careful, neutral language. Normandy dominates the pages, not as a single battle, but as the moment everything became clear. He notes how German officers initially assessed the Sherman through the lens of duels that rarely occurred. He records how terrain, logistics, and coordination reshaped the meaning of armor warfare. He describes how American doctrine treated tanks not as knights on a battlefield, but as tools, interchangeable, reparable, subordinate to the larger aim. As he writes, Keller realizes that the hedgerows of Normandy were not merely a battlefield. They were a test. One Germany failed. Outside, the winter wind carries the distant sound of engines once more. Keller no longer reaches for his binoculars. He does not need to see them. He knows what they are and what they mean. The Sherman has followed him from France into Germany, not as a specter of fear, but as a constant reminder of how wars are truly won. Not by perfection, but by persistence. Not by superiority in isolation, but by adequacy multiplied by organization. Normandy taught that lesson in blood and steel. Everything since has been confirmation. Section 12. When numbers became destiny. January 15th, 1945. Near the Roer River. The cold is merciless now, a living thing that creeps through wool and leather, stiffens fingers, and steals breath. Ice rims the riverbanks, and the water moves slow and dark beneath a low, colorless sky. Franz Keller stands with a small group of officers near a battered observation post, watching the American side of the river through frost fog binoculars. They are gathering again. Shermans line the far bank in disciplined rows, engines rumbling softly, exhaust plumes drifting upward like ghostly banners. Engineers move among them, measuring, marking, preparing crossings. Artillery sits further back, barrels elevated, crews working with practice calm. Everything Keller sees speaks of preparation, not desperation, not haste, but inevitability. This, he realizes, is what German officers once failed to understand. In Normandy, numbers were seen as crude. Quantity was something to be overcome by skill and courage. Here, months later, Keller understands that numbers are not crude at all. They are destiny when paired with organization and time. The crossing begins before dawn. Artillery fire smothers the German positions along the river, shells exploding with dull, concussive thuds that shake ice loose from the banks. Smoke spreads thick and white, obscuring everything. When the barrage lifts, Sherman tanks begin to move on pontoon bridges, tracks clanking, steel groaning underweight. German guns fire, knocking out a tank midway across. The Sherman burns briefly, flames reflecting off the ice, but the bridge remains intact. Engineers rush forward, clearing wreckage, repairing damage under fire. Another Sherman rolls on, then another. Keller watches in silence. He remembers the early briefings in 1944, when German intelligence officers spoke of American production figures with thinly veiled skepticism. Numbers were mentioned, then dismissed. They will not know how to use them, someone had said. They lack experience. Experience, Keller thinks now, can be learned. Industry cannot be improvised. As American armor establishes a bridgehead, German resistance flares, then falters. A Panther ambush claims 2 Shermans from concealment, its gun roaring triumphantly. Within minutes, American artillery answers. The Panther is bracketed, immobilized, then silent. The bridgehead holds. By midday, Shermans fan out across the German side of the river. Infantry close behind, tank tracks carving fresh scars into frozen fields. The advance resumes its familiar rhythm. Halt, fire, move, repeat. German units fall back in fragments, buying time that no longer matters. Later, Keller sits in a ruined farmhouse used as a temporary command post. A stove crackles weakly in the corner. An operations officer reads intercepted American communications aloud. They are mundane, procedural, almost boring. Requests for fuel. Reports of minor resistance. Timetables for the next phase. There's no sense of crisis. Keller reflects on how profoundly different this is from German communications. Always urgent, always short of something essential. The Sherman does not dominate German thoughts because it is terrifying. It dominates because it is dependable. It shows up when expected. It functions in mud, in hedgerows, in forests in winter. One officer, younger than Keller, speaks aloud what many are thinking. If they had fewer tanks, he says, we could stop them. Keller shakes his head slowly. If they had fewer tanks, he replies, they would fight differently, and they would still advance. That is the cruel genius of it. The Americans do not rely on a single advantage. Take one away, and another compensates. Lose tanks, bring more. Lose time, bring pressure. Lose ground, bring firepower. Normandy was the first place where this truth revealed itself fully. The roar is merely its echo. That night, Keller walks alone outside the farmhouse. In the distance, American engines hum steadily, unbroken by the cold. He stares into the darkness and understands that the war's outcome has been decided not by brilliance or heroism, but by accumulation, of steel, of fuel, of trained men, of repaired machines. The Sherman is the embodiment of that accumulation. It is not elegant. It is not invincible. But it is enough, again and again, until resistance becomes irrelevant. Section 13. The Quiet Acceptance. February 28, 1945. Franz Keller stands on the upper floor of a shattered apartment building, looking out across the Rhine Valley through a gap where a wall once stood. The soundscape of the war has changed again. There are fewer frantic orders now, fewer hurried movements. What remains is a steady, grinding advance that no longer pretends to be uncertain. Across the river, American armor gathers. Shermans idle in long files along bombed-out streets, their silhouettes unmistakable even through smoke and haze. Some bear white stars hastily repainted to avoid friendly fire. Others carry improvised markings, unit symbols scrawled in chalk or paint. Their tracks are worn, their hulls dented and scarred, but they run. Always they run. Keller no longer hears mocking nicknames among German officers. The language has shifted to something quieter, heavier. Acceptance. Inside a cellar, serving as a battalion command post, officers gather around a map illuminated by a single lantern. The discussion is brief. There's no talk of stopping the Americans at the Rhine, only of delaying them, of destroying bridges, of buying days where weeks are no longer possible. An artillery officer gestures weakly toward the map. If we concentrate here, we might destroy a few tanks. A major shakes his head, and tomorrow there will be more. No one argues. When the American assault begins, it is almost anticlimactic. Artillery pounds known positions. Smoke blankets the river crossings. Engineers work with calm determination, bridging under fire as they have done so many times before. Shermans move forward methodically, covering the crossings, firing into suspected resistance points, withdrawing and advancing again as needed. A German anti-tank gun fires from concealment, scoring a hit. A Sherman burns on the riverbank, flames licking upward. Keller watches, waiting for the familiar surge of satisfaction. It never comes. Another Sherman takes its place. Then another. The gun is silenced. The crossing continues. Keller feels something settle inside him. Not despair, not fear, but clarity. The outcome has been visible since Normandy. Everything since has been a matter of time and distance. Later that night, Keller encounters a captured American tanker under guard, a staff sergeant with a soot-streaked face and tired eyes. The man sits calmly, sipping water from a canteen, hands steady despite the circumstances. Keller listens as he speaks to his guard in halting German. "We lose tanks," the tanker says matter-of-factly. "We get new ones. We lose men, that's harder. But we keep going." The simplicity of it strikes Keller harder than any technical analysis. In the days that follow, Cologne falls. The Rhine is crossed. American armored columns pour eastward, Shermans leading the way through the heart of Germany. The pattern never changes. Losses occur. Repairs are made. Replacements arrive. The advance resumes. German units dissolve into fragments, some fighting fiercely to the end, others surrendering when resistance becomes meaningless. Keller moves with a DOP element that exists mostly on paper now, its authority diminished to coordinating retreats that are already overtaken by events. One evening, Keller pauses beside the wreck of a Tiger tank, its massive gun pointing uselessly skyward. The armor is intact, the machines still formidable in death. Nearby, a burned-out Sherman lies in a ditch, almost fragile by comparison. Keller knows which one mattered more. The Tiger was a statement. The Sherman was a solution. Normandy taught him that distinction. Germany learned it too late. Section 14. The Final Lesson. April 10th, 1945. Central Germany, near the Elbe. Spring returns to the land with cruel irony. Fields green once more beneath a pale sun. Birdsong drifting over roads scarred by tank tracks and shell craters. Franz Keller walks with a small Stopp group along a country lane lined with blossoming trees, their petals falling softly onto wreckage and corpses alike. The war is dying, but does not go quietly. American Shermans move along parallel roads, engines humming with the same steady confidence Keller first noticed in Normandy. Some carry white flags of identification for coordination with Soviet forces advancing from the east. Others tow captured German vehicles or escort columns of prisoners. Even now, at the edge of victory, the system remains intact. At a crossroads, Keller watches a Sherman halt while engineers clear a mine. The tank idles patiently, its crew relaxed but alert. There is no rush. Time finally belongs to them. German resistance in this sector is sporadic, symbolic. Isolated units fight on out of duty or desperation, but most engagements end quickly. The Shermans do not need to prove anything. They simply apply pressure, and pressure is enough. Keller sits later in a farmhouse used as a temporary headquarters, writing what he knows will be his final report. He does not write of specific battles. He writes of understanding. He traces the arc back to Normandy, to the hedgerows where German officers first confronted an uncomfortable truth. They had measured the enemy's tanks and found them wanting, without measuring the enemy's war. They had mocked the Sherman because it was ordinary, because it did not fit the image of decisive armored combat taught in their schools. Normandy shattered that image. The Sherman was never meant to stand alone. It was meant to be one piece in a vast, resilient structure. Destroy one, and another took its place. Damage one, and it was repaired. Kill a crew, and replacements appeared. The tank's very ordinariness was its strength. Keller recalls a phrase from an American manual he once saw translated, "Good enough, on time, in sufficient quantity." At the time, it had seemed laughably imprecise. Now, it feels brutally exact. As the war's end approaches, Keller senses that this lesson will outlive the conflict. Future armies will study armor thickness and gun calibers, as they always have, but some will also remember Normandy and the hedgerows where superiority gave way to sufficiency. On April 12th, Keller surrenders with his unit to American forces near the Elbe. The process is orderly, almost bureaucratic. Shermans sit nearby, engines idling, crews watching calmly as prisoners are processed. There is no triumph in their expressions, only relief, perhaps, and fatigue. Keller stands with his hands raised, looking at the tank nearest him. Its hull is scratched, its paint chipped, its star faded. It looks nothing like the invincible machines of propaganda. It looks like a tool that has been used again and again until the job was done. In that moment, Keller feels no bitterness, only the weight of understanding. The Sherman was not the best tank of the war, but in Normandy and everywhere after, it proved to be the most decisive.